On this Sunday night, Canada hits back. From household appliances to Florida orange juice to salad dressing, Canada publishes its list of counter-tariffs.
I think we have to buckle up. This is an unprecedented circumstance.
The rush to clear American products off some store shelves.
Not a single American product. It was easy.
As shoppers are urged to buy Canadian. Bracing for impact south of the border as lawmakers there worry about the hit to Americans.
About $3,000 of additional price on cars, up to $10,000 on trucks.
Also, what Trump's broader trade war means for the world economy. And a Canadian hero, once again, a free man.
It was nerve-wracking. It was intimidating.
A Global News exclusive interview with a veteran detained by the Taliban.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is a firestorm of a reaction tonight to the tariffs U.S. President Donald Trump has imposed on Canadian exports, which begin on Tuesday. Canada has issued its own list of counter-tariffs, and premiers are taking swift action regionally. Across North America, there is anxiety and anger about this unfolding trade war and concern over how long it may last. We have comprehensive coverage tonight from correspondents in Ottawa, Halifax, Washington, and the UK. And we begin with Mackenzie Gray in the nation's capital on Canada's response to Trump. Mackenzie.
It took less than 24 hours, Carolyn, but Donald Trump seems to have shown a new reason for his trade war, and no, it's not fentanyl. Without this massive subsidy, Canada ceases to exist as a viable country. Canada should become our cherished 51st state, Trump posted online. In other words, annexation by tariff.
He's not in it to negotiate with us. He's in it to take what we have. Period. Full stop.
Trump's claim the U.S. is subsidizing Canada isn't true either. He's referencing the U.S. trade deficit that's based on all the discounted Canadian oil they buy. But whatever the rationale, the tariffs are coming.
This will be felt right across the country in different sectors at different times.
The Finance Department laying out the first round of Canadian counter-tariffs, $30 billion worth, focused in part on states important to Trump. Florida orange juice, motorcycles from Pennsylvania, and household products from Ohio and South Carolina, just a few of the 1,256 items that will have a 25% tax starting Tuesday.
Canadians want the government to stand up, and they want us to stand up in the face of this unreasonable decision by Mr. Trump.
Businesses can get an exemption if goods can't be sourced domestically, but in the end, companies and Canadians will now face higher prices because of the counter-tariffs, money that will go to Ottawa. Senior government officials couldn't say how much they're expected to rake in, but it's cash the Conservatives want spent on Canadians.
All of it should go back to the workers and businesses that are affected, and most of it should go back in the form of a massive tax cut.
Pierre Poilievre also wants Parliament recalled, something the Prime Minister isn't eager to do.
We have the tools to be able to support Canadians through this challenging time as it stands.
The Liberals have tried to sell the Americans on Canada's $1.3 billion in new border spending, including meeting with border czar Tom Homan back in December. But a month on, he seems not to even have talked to Trump about it.
We'll brief him on what I heard, and so he knows what they have done, what they said they will do. But I'll leave that after a discussion with the president this week.
The Bank of Canada has predicted the tariff war will bring a recession, increase inflation, and lead to a falling loonie, Carolyn, and the latter is already happening. The dollar hitting 67 cents, its lowest level since 2003.
Mackenzie, President Trump landed in Maryland at the Joint Base Andrews last hour and gave an impromptu press conference saying he is planning to speak with Trudeau.
Yeah, and it's important to note that Mr. Trudeau said yesterday at his press conference he's been trying to get a hold of Trump since the inauguration, hasn't been able to do that. This will be their first conversation where they can talk about any way these tariffs might not be imposed on Canada. But Mr. Trump got asked that directly. What can Canada do to make sure the tariffs don't come in? Here's what he had to say.
Well, it could happen. If they do anything, we will. Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street. We subsidize Canada by the tune of about $200 billion a year. And for what? What do we get out of it?
It's important to note Canada is not subsidized by the U.S. He's referencing trade surpluses the U.S. have. That number is not correct also. And if the U.S. didn't buy so much Canadian oil, they wouldn't have one. But it'll be interesting to see if Mr. Trudeau can negotiate any of the demands that Trump has. He also talked about the Canadian banking sector, the first time I've heard him reference that. Talked about dairy, other farming activities too. So lots of issues for Mr. Trudeau to discuss with Donald Trump. But we've already seen the markets really react to the issues associated with tariffs. The Canadian dollar is now at 67 cents, the lowest it's been, Carolyn, since 2003.
And that phone call between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau expected to happen tomorrow morning. Thank you for that, Mackenzie. So Canadians are already starting to feel the impact of Trump's tariffs. Tonight, Heidi Petracek looks at the trickle-down effect and how provinces, businesses, and consumers are pushing back.
Not a single American product.
Grocery shopping has become an act of patriotism.
Because our country matters. That's it.
As consumers push back in reaction to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs.
Took me a little bit extra time to look at products, but all Canadian.
Processed and packaged products, which do come from the U.S., soon to cost more.
I do expect some prices to increase, yes, because of tariffs, but mostly because of a weaker Canadian dollar.
I think it's crazy that it's come to this, but I think it's good that Canada is clapping back.
Some of that clapback has provinces pulling American liquor from store shelves, including in Manitoba.
This means that we are going to be taking $80 million out of the U.S. economy.
Both countries are going to suffer, and we have to do what we can to support our own economy.
So the lumber comes up from where it's been produced at this point and goes.
It's an uncertain time for Canadian industries that rely on U.S. trade, like softwood lumber, which provides 25% of U.S. demand.
To start a trade war with a peace-loving nation right next door is a little sad.
Robin Wilbur is a third-generation sawmill operator in Nova Scotia, who's just not sure what's going to come next.
If production is curtailed, yes, then the production in the forest end will also be curtailed, and that will affect a lot of people in Nova Scotia.
The potential, for lost production is very, very high, and we make an awful lot of intermediate goods, things that go into supply chain.
All the more reason, says one economist, to eliminate trade barriers within the country.
Our premiers have to get together, sign a real trade deal within Canada, and if we do that, all the nonsense from Trump is just going to be peanuts.
They won't have a cent from us anymore.
Meanwhile, many Canadians say that's the spending choice they're going to make in the country's defense. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Elmsdale, Nova Scotia.
The number of items on Canada's counter-tariff list is extensive. You can see them on our website, globalnews.ca. Well, there are not only concerns about the consequence of the trade war on this side of the border, many Americans are also bracing for the impact of tariffs. Jackson Proskow has more on the U.S. reaction and whether anything could sway Donald Trump.
As President Donald Trump spent the weekend golfing in Florida, a sense of panic set in back in Washington over the impact his massive tariffs will have on prices he promised to lower.
I will explore every way that we can legislatively prevent these tariffs from happening.
Business leaders, industry experts, and economists all warn of serious consequences. The unprecedented and unprovoked trade fight is so baffling, the Wall Street Journal editorial board called it the dumbest trade war in history.
Is this the start of a trade war?
Well, Nancy, I hope it's not. We're the two closest, strongest allies in the entire world.
Canadian officials spent the weekend mounting a tour de force on U.S. TV.
We view ourselves as your neighbor, your closest friend, your ally.
Warning Americans of real implications, especially if the U.S. turns its back on Canadian oil exports.
If you didn't get them from us, you'd probably have to get them from Venezuela or other non-allied countries.
The Trump administration hardly seems to care. The vice president even dismissed the idea that Canada could possibly retaliate.
The problem with this whole idea that they're going to retaliate is they have already been taking advantage of America for decades. The retaliation is Donald Trump saying no more. We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore.
In these final hours, some Republicans believe Trump can still be talked down from his economic rampage, though there's no clear sense of how that might happen.
To our friends in Canada, I really appreciate what you're doing on the northern border. I think these tariffs are designed to get these countries to change their behavior.
As for what might change Trump's behavior, it could be the stock markets, which so far have hedged their bets on whether these tariffs are really happening. A sharp downturn Monday might sway a president who is famously obsessed with how well the markets perform. Carolyn?
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thank you. We're going to bring in our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson now for a broader sense of how this trade war might play out. Mercedes, to some, it's apparent this isn't about fentanyl moving across the border. So if we don't know what the actual goalposts are, how will Canada know how or when it's satisfied what the U.S. is after?
Well, Carolyn, the short answer is we don't know exactly. The president didn't spell out specific benchmarks where the tariffs would be reduced or removed. He cited fentanyl as the main aggravating factor in his formal orders, but it's not clear if a reduction is sufficient or if total elimination is required. And that's because this is about more than just fentanyl. The president has raised a multitude of grievances against Canada. From the trade deficit to defense spending to people crossing the border, it's been a moving target even today. Some Americans think that this is part of Trump's plan to try to raise revenue with a consumption tax in the tariffs so that he can cut income tax. Others say tariffs are just part of his ideology. Whatever the answer is, it makes it much more complicated for Canada. And at this point, while we know the president has threatened consequences for Canada's retaliatory tariffs, what those even might be or when they might kick in or how much is all a mystery.
Okay, so Prime Minister Trudeau has said he's not going to recall Parliament. Why do you think that is? And does that limit what he can do?
So the Prime Minister is still the Prime Minister and has a functioning government. He has the power to represent Canada, and he can certainly issue those retaliatory tariffs. Those don't require Parliament's approval. The complication here is more political in having Parliament prorogued. Does it risk an election to recall it, or would that be better or worse for the country than the current situation? The Prime Minister's plan to stay on and negotiate with Trump has clearly run into some trouble, he told Canadians last night. He hasn't spoken with the president since his inauguration, and it hasn't been for lack of Mr. Trudeau trying to reach out. When he would need Parliament, Carolyn, would be if he wanted to pass major pandemic-style supports for Canadian industry and Canadian workers.
Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson, thank you for that. Canada isn't the only country Trump is targeting in this trade war. Mexico and China, two other major trade partners with America, are also going to be hit with significant tariffs. Both countries are now laying out their plans for retaliation. And despite fears of the impact to the global economy, Trump has indicated he's not stopping there. Vincent McAvenny has more.
As millions across China travelled home after celebrating the Spring Festival and Lunar New Year, the calm of the weekend was interrupted. The announcement of President Trump's 10% tariffs on Chinese imports, on top of existing US charges, headline news. The country's Commerce Ministry immediately expressing its strong dissatisfaction in a statement vowing countermeasures and to file a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization against the US for its wrongful practice. In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum, who spoke on the phone with Prime Minister Trudeau on Saturday, similarly responded with retaliatory 25% tariffs, but didn't specify yet on which US goods. President Trump has threatened to hit the European Union next, claiming the bloc of 27 European nations has treated the US terribly. The EU has pledged a firm response, with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on a visit to Britain Sunday, insisting a trade war is the wrong path.
Globalization, the worldwide exchange of goods and commodities, has proven to be a great success story that has created prosperity for us all.
International trade experts believe further escalation could drive global inflation.
Overall, this kind of trade war is just damaging for the economy. This is probably not a 1930s depression scenario, so we're not expecting a widespread crash because there are supply chains, a completely different economy in the 2020s, but it's certainly overall likely to be negative, and global growth, and we're already struggling in many countries, is likely to be lower as a result.
With consumers in many countries already struggling with cost of living crises, many will be hoping coordinated action between their governments, usually classed as allies of the United States, might help stop this from breaking into an all-out trade war. Carolyn?
Vincent McAvenny in London, thank you. He was captured by the Taliban while trying to help others flee Afghanistan. Coming up, the remarkable story of Canadian Dave, who is once again a free man. A Global News exclusive tonight as we hear for the first time from a Canadian veteran who was detained by the Taliban. Canadian Dave, as he's become known, is considered a hero for his work helping free more than 100 Afghans during the fall of Kabul in 2021. It was upon his return to Afghanistan last November to help others escape that he was captured. Today, he is once again a free man, and he spoke with our Jeff Semple.
Day 48, 28th of December.
Dave Lavery shows his wife the diary he kept during his 77 days detained by the Taliban.
I basically wrote myself off. I'm in here for the long term.
The Canadian veteran spent decades with the military and the United Nations. When the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan in 2021, Lavery was the only Canadian on the ground, rescuing hundreds of Afghans and their families who'd worked for the Canadian military, earning him the nickname Canadian Dave. Last Remembrance Day, Lavery returned to Kabul carrying 18 Canadian visas to rescue more Afghan families. But after arriving at the airport, he was stopped by the Taliban.
It was nerve-wracking. It was intimidating.
His wife was ahead, waiting outside the airport, but he didn't show.
My heart is empty. I just can't believe it.
Lavery was held in a small cell, accused of being a spy. Eventually, he became sick, taken to hospital, and then transferred to a guarded safe house. One night, he found an old cell phone and charger inside a drawer and secretly called his wife and son.
And I'm under these covers, Jeff, up on the 4th floor, and the guards are just below me, and I'm sitting there, and I didn't know if this was going to work, and then all of a sudden it's like, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm starting to vibrate.
Hey, Brad, can you hear me?
Hey, I can hear you. His son recorded the call.
Holding their husband. Hopefully this week we can see you.
When you hear his voice on the other end of the phone, what was that like?
Oh, it was so shocking.
Lavery's family was working to secure his release. Ottawa won't deal with the Taliban, but the Qatari government intervened on their behalf. Last month, Lavery was told he'd served his sentence and was being freed. He met his family at the airport.
And then when I cleared customs, that's when Junping said she came running, and she hit me like a vice grip and wouldn't let go.
For Lavery, another mission accomplished. The 18 Afghans whose visas he was to deliver have also been rescued. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, it's a program meant to help First Nation children thrive, but is it being misused? A look at the Jordan's Principle program next. After the death of a young Indigenous boy in Manitoba in 2005, the federal government created a program vowing First Nation children would get timely access to social, educational, and medical care. That program bears his name, Jordan's Principle. But today, Jordan's father says that program is being misused. Melissa Ridgen reports.
It's a sign of the times. Jordan's Principle offices out of money in some parts of the country, leaving First Nations children with special medical, social, or educational needs empty-handed. The father of Jordan River Anderson, who lived and died in a Winnipeg hospital far from his home in northern Manitoba, is calling for an emergency probe into what's happened to the program.
We need to talk. We need some answers. We need a meeting. We need to support people across Canada that stand up with us. Stand up with us.
He addressed an elephant in the room, too, concerns that the program is badly managed and abused. More than 100,000 applications are made through Jordan's Principle each year. Some of what people want money for: modeling headshots, zipline kits, music lessons, snowmobiles, private school tuition and uniforms, gaming consoles, even glow sticks. It frustrates folks like Eileen Linksleg, who raised a grandson with special needs with no help.
They enrolled him, and he was there until he was 18. And in all that time, all he ever got from the Jordan's Principle on our reserve was a coloring book and crayons.
She and Anderson and many others contend the biggest abusers are those in leadership roles in communities.
It's a hypocritical facade because they're eating up our children's money. They're eating the future of our children.
While chiefs and advocates say more money is the solution, Indigenous Services Minister Patty Haidu counters that the Liberal government has spent $9 billion on Jordan's Principle since 2016. Canada is going to a court to challenge a recent Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling that requires Ottawa to immediately process a backlog of 140,000 Jordan's Principle claims. Ernest Anderson feels the program as it is now is an insult to his son's memory.
If your kid was to be used like that, you wouldn't like it.
He and others concerned that many of those applications in limbo are for children with legitimate needs, lost in a sea of requests for frivolous things. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
Up next, it's the one day of the year we put our faith in a rodent to forecast how much winter is left. The Outlook, next. Not the best sign for those who took public transit around Vancouver this morning. A winter blast hit the city and the surrounding BC South Coast, a region used to rainy winters, with some places seeing around 25 centimeters of snow. There were also reports of many vehicles spinning out. Monday commuters haven't dodged the weather either, with the forecast calling for more snow tonight and into tomorrow morning. And if you're wondering how much longer winter is going to last, today is the day we look to the groundhogs. The furry rodents issued their annual forecast, but this year's predictions were all over the place.
Willie did not see his shadow. We will have an early spring.
Wyerton Willie in Ontario and Alberta's Balzac Billy did not see their shadows, indicating an early spring is on the way. But Fred La Marmotte in Quebec and Nova Scotia's Shubenacadie Sam were feeling less optimistic, predicting 6 more weeks of winter. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is this bald eagle in Glenora, Ontario. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Jeff Semple will be with you tomorrow. Have a great night.